What do you all prefer? Do you like the moody lights or do you like the halfway lights? That's probably better right there, huh? Did everyone who's a student in this class have a wonderfully restorative spring break? Did you go skiing during your spring break? This city, this Western New York. Welcome everyone to our seventh plasma event of 2024. My name is Elia Vargas. I'm a visiting assistant professor in the Department of Media Study and the curator of the 2024 Plasma series. This is our seventh event this year. For those of you that have been here before, that might feel a little strange, give you deja vu. Due to unforeseen cancellations, our events have shifted recently, and there will be one more upcoming cancellation, sadly, due to the solar eclipse, which is on Monday. Our April 8th event with Canadian environmental media scholar and practitioner, indeed a practitioner of solar voltaic and solar networks, Dr. Ann Pasek, has unfortunately been canceled due to UB's decision last week to cancel all in-person classes and events. Some of you may not mind, it's unfortunate, however. Plasma, performance, lectures, and screenings by media artists is sponsored by the University at Buffalo's Department of Media Study, and funding is provided by the Office of the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences. Tonight's talk is co-sponsored by the Buffalo Institute of Contemporary Art. Plasma is a public speaker series that brings innovative and celebrated artists from a national and international context to the Buffalo area. It is also a course that exposes new and experimental forms of media arts, to undergraduate students. For those students, please be ready to sign in using the word generosity in the week 8 module sign-in. Please go there now. It will remain open for 1 minute. Again, that word is generosity. This talk is being streamed live. Welcome to those of you who are attending remotely. Please note, and with apologies, we can only take questions in person. I would like to thank Emily Reynolds and Nando Alvarez Perez at the Buffalo Institute of Contemporary Art for their help in making this event possible. I'm grateful for their openness to collaborating with the Department of Media Study and to include the broader Buffalo arts community in our events. Tonight, I am very pleased to introduce a fellow West Coaster, a curator that I admire, not only for her artistic vision, but for her fierce commitment to a radical openness of what art and arts communities can be. I have experienced Ceci Moss's work at large arts institutions, in alternative exhibition spaces, in repurposed delivery trucks, and in transformed living rooms. I have read her words on screens, on paper pages, in books, in Xerox copies of zines. Regardless of the cultural space, she sustains a generous spirit of thoughtfulness and possibility. Ceci is a curator, writer, and educator with 20 years of professional practice, organizing solo, group, touring, and online exhibitions, as well as public programs, performances, and screenings in museums, galleries, and artist-run spaces. She currently serves as the director and chief curator of the Mandeville Art Gallery at UC San Diego, a non-collecting institute for contemporary art with a 5-decade history of presenting innovative exhibitions in the context of a major research university. It's a mouthful for me, to be sure. She also holds a dual appointment as a professor of practice in the Department of Visual Arts, where she teaches courses in museum and curatorial studies. Previously, she was the founding director of GAS, the assistant curator of visual arts at Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, the senior editor of the art and technology nonprofit arts organization Rhizome, and special projects coordinator at the New Museum of Contemporary Art. She has a MA and PhD in comparative literature from New York University and a BA in history and sociology from UC Berkeley. Please welcome Ceci Moss.
Wow, speaking of generosity, that was a beautiful introduction, and I'm just so happy and pleased to be here. Thank you, Elia, for your words, and thanks to Emily and Nando for having me here. I got to meet with the Beacon School folks yesterday, and I had a wonderful introduction to all of the work happening here in Buffalo. So I'm grateful to be here. So in today's talk, I'll discuss my book, Expanded Internet Art, my curatorial work through the former alternative art space I founded called GAS, as well as my current academic and curatorial pursuits at UC San Diego as part of my dual appointment as the director and chief curator of the Mandeville Art Gallery and as a professor of practice in the Department of Visual Arts. So for the talk today, you'll see that I've created a through line across these varied projects. So you can see how my book influenced the establishment of GAS and how the experience of creating, maintaining, and ultimately closing GAS led me to my current leadership position at the Mandeville Art Gallery. So I would see this talk as almost like 3 chapters or something. So the first chapter is the art object in an informational milieu. So this is my book that came out in fall 2019 and was actually originally pitched as my PhD topic. I met some of the PhDs today, so this might sound like familiar territory for you, in 2009. And then I wrote it from 2011 to 2015. And it was developed in New York City amidst discussions around post-internet in my circles at the time, where I was working at Rhizome, which is an art and technology organization at the New Museum. And many of the artists in my peer group were thinking about these things. Yeah, it seemed this was also a moment before many commercial galleries sort of took the post-internet art term to sell work. So it was an interesting moment, but another thing that was also happening, I mean, one of the main things that was happening at the time is I was witnessing artists experiment with using social media as an artistic platform. And it seemed at the time qualitatively different than earlier internet artists who were building websites. And so I used this research project to really think that through. And in the book, I argue that internet artists working parallel to the rise in the internet's ubiquity from those technological developments, also, having internet on your phone is part of the story too. So from roughly 2006 to 2013, these artists are increasingly making things that float back and forth between network data files and physical material. So that's sort of what the experimentation that was happening around me. And then these works are nimble and flexible. They can be a sculpture, an installation, or a file. And the adjective expanded in front of internet art calls attention to this open-ended approach and an acceptance that the artwork is not inert and closed, but evolving within its network situation. And it's constantly negotiating the different supports that enable its movement. So that's sort of what I set out to do in this project. Yeah, I provide in the book this definition of expanded internet art. I say that expanded internet art is a continuously multiple element that exists within a distributed system, a continual becoming, an artwork without an object or center, without an autonomous singular existence. So really, artists were making work that they knew would be like sort of placed within an informational flow, right? Um, and one of the other things that I argue in the book is that expanded internet art is a product of an informational milieu, which is a term I'll talk about in a moment, where informational dynamics optimize the production and transmission of digital information within the immediate environment. So the continual sort of becoming aspect of this, relayed by the term expanded, expresses the notion that internet art has co-developed alongside with the internet, and that it is an emergence in concert with the conditions of its existence brought together by a milieu. So, okay, that's a lot. That's a mouthful. What does that actually mean in practice? Let's look at an example. So one of the artworks that I talk about in the book is Artie Verkant's Image Object series, which was started in 2011, again, when I started this research project. And in this series, the works exist as both physical sculptures and altered documentation images. So Verkant begins works as a digital file, which he then precision cuts and prints on Sintra in order to resemble the design of that digital file, and it gives it a dimension of sculpture. And when these prints are hung in a gallery and documented officially in the form of installation shots, he then alters that documentation to create derivative works and new forms posted online. So there's this cyclical way in which digital file, sculpture, documentation, alteration, put online, and then then those altered images then become the source of the cycle, and it starts again, right? So the circular process between the file, physical object, and back again uproots the work, allowing it to exist somewhere in between. And again, artists around me at the time when I was writing this book were working in this way. So I sort of set out, to write this book to really think about that critically. The other kind of key term, so we talked about expanded internet art. The other key term in the book is an informational milieu. And I argue in the book that the key issue in expanded internet art practice is not that the internet art is online or offline, real or virtual, net or post, but that all art is increasingly embedded within what Tiziana Terranova called an informational milieu. And she talks about this in Network Culture, Politics for the Information Age. And I remember reading this for the first time in a seminar taught by Alex Galloway as a PhD student and being like blown away. And I still return to it. And so I just, if for our media studies majors, run out and buy this book if you haven't encountered it already. So in Network Culture, Politics for the Information Age, Terranova develops her term informational milieu through reading of French philosopher Guibert Simondon's concept of a milieu. So Simondon was working in the 1940s and 1950s during the advent of cybernetics. And he described how things emerge in relation to their environment as a type of becoming, one that explicitly presented itself in opposition to the dominant theories of information at the time, such as the Shannon-Weaver sender-receiver model of communication, which maybe you've encountered in some of your classes. So in contrast, Simondon posited that there's no content proper to any elements within a system, and form as signal is never abstracted from matter as noise. So for him, for Simondon, information is incessantly engaged in a continuous process of exchange within a metastable milieu full of potential energy, and communication always contains the terms of its metastable milieu, and it can't be abstracted from it. Basically, with the signal always contains the noise, which would be an easier way to kind of phrase that. So for Terranova, Simondon's ideas were compelling precisely because of his understanding that information is not the content of communication, but an unfolding process within its material constitution. So really always being aware of that material constitution. Informational processes exist in the environment in a way that is inherently immersive, excessive, and dynamic, and that points towards an interpretation of information that is not reduced to mere signal noise. So in the book, she talks about so in Terranova's analysis, information therefore becomes something much more complex than sort of signal. And she states, information is not simply the content of a message or the main form assumed by the commodity in late capitalist economies, but also another name for the increasing visibility importance of such massless flows as they become the environment within which contemporary culture unfolds. In this sense, we can refer to informational cultures as involving the explicit constitution of an informational milieu, a milieu composed of dynamic and shifting relations between such massless flows. So the move that Terra Nova makes in this book is that she extrapolates an informational milieu from the processual dynamics within Simondon's model to characterize a moment in which nearly all aspects of human environments exist in ongoing exchange with digital communication. And it asks us to consider how the logic and demands of information's massless flows are integral to the reorganization of culture and representation. And one of the things that I'm arguing in the book is that internet artists in my kind of generation who were starting to make things that weren't necessarily websites, but were thinking about how, sort of born digital content goes beyond the screen into sculpture, or goes beyond to, examples such as this one, are part of a larger move in culture. We're all and this is Terra Nova's argument. We're all there's a reorganization of both culture and representation because as a result of this informational milieu. And so I sort of use the story of expanded internet art to talk about those shifts. But I think it also applies to all culture. And we see this all the time. You see, for instance, like choreographers who basically design movement knowing that people are going to take Instagram photos of that movement, right? So instead of, choreographing for the screen, you're choreographing for Instagram. So this argument, I would say, applies to a lot of different art forms, but for this book I was looking at how these shifts were impacting internet art specifically. So this sort of chapter of the talk is looking at the art object in the age of an informational milieu. I also want to talk about the exhibition in the age of an informational milieu, and move towards the project space I was running in LA called Gas. I started this space in 2017. I was at YBCA. I did all of these shows. I did a series of exhibitions that were looking at art and technology, actually called Control, where we're commissioning projects by really wonderful artists who are thinking about these things. And then I left, and then I moved to LA, and I started this gallery. I bought a converted box truck and started doing shows around Los Angeles. This was the mission statement. So this project space was only operational for 3 years. And I say that Gas is a mobile, autonomous, experimental, and network platform for contemporary art. So it's mobile, obviously, it's in a truck. And part of the reason I decided to use that kind of space is in direct response to the geography of Los Angeles, which is very spread out. And so it allowed me to connect to disparate scenes and communities and be a connector between them. So I would organize 3 shows a year, and every show I would partner and be kind of in residence at an artist run space typically, and be there like every weekend. So it allowed me to bring these shows all over Los Angeles. But then at the same time, the shows existed online. And so I was commissioning projects for the exhibitions that were on the website as well. And the autonomous thing, word and experimental sort of speaks to that, where I had complete freedom in exhibition production. I could put artists first. We could do crazy things, like I would wear sculpture, or we have scents in the gallery, and I could take risks. And there was room for failure because the overhead essentially was just parking the truck. So there wasn't really any staff. It was just me working with artists to install these wild and weird shows, and working with inspiring and super cool art spaces around LA to share those exhibitions. But I think also, the term platform is also important here. So it was trying to think about institution as a platform, and how can you design a space that nurtures other spaces and other activities? How can that be open? I wanted to kind of, I think about things as more lateral, horizontal, fluid, and open. And so Gas, the term gas was less about, yes, okay, it's like a truck, but it was actually really thinking about kind of the structure of gas and like how can you actually create art that sort of is dispersed in that way. Yeah, I did a lot of I do a lot of different things with different artists. We would do a publication for each exhibition, so that was part of it as well. And performances and site-specific projects. And then I also would produce an edition for each exhibition, which would help support the production costs for the work. And the price point for the editions was quite low; it was always under $50. So artists and other people in the community could buy them, and then we'd raise like $1,000 or something, and that would also help pay whatever materials and supplies we needed to install the show. Um, and there was a gallery in the back truck, and also we would use the front driving cabin as a gallery space too. And so this is an example of gas being parked at Tin Flats, which is an artist-run studio space that has an open gallery, a rotating gallery. So you have a sense that I worked with all these different spaces all over LA and big spaces too. I was able to bring the truck to the Getty, and I got permission to park it on the Tavertine if you've ever been there, which took there was a lot of meetings. So yeah. I did a lot of shows. I did a lot of projects with this. I thought, just for given the sake of time, I'd focus on one single artwork and one single project, so you have a sense of how artists kind of were looking at the space. Oh, before I do that, this is actually a really important slide. So this sort of subsection is looking at the exhibition in an informational menu. And I think that really speaks to sort of the curatorial model I was working with and then the more traditional exhibition models that I was working against. So here you see that the standard exhibition model, in more traditional spaces, you have the container, which is the white cube, the gallery museum, plus the content, which is the artwork, and then the meaning is the exhibition. That's sort of the container content meaning. What I was trying to work through with GAS is a new exhibition model where the platform, again, as I mentioned, platform is a really important key term here for me. The platform operates as an active agent. So again, the website is used to produce show work. There's this mobile gallery. We do pop-up events and activations, and then publications. So everything can be an active agent. The artworks are in every medium as active agents. So showing sound, video, performance, fashion, and some, as I mentioned, wearing things, and everything was used. All the artworks, it wasn't a specific kind of medium. All mediums were represented basically in each show. And I was doing a lot of group shows too, so I was able to work with a lot of different artists. Plus the milieu. So you have these responsive changing conditions for the truck. So maybe I'm parking the truck at an opening across town, or at an art book fair, or or just on the street, which I did in some instances. So you have these responsive changing conditions for the gallery itself, but also I would also imagine that people would come to the website and see the artworks that were hosted there as well. So the meaning of the art event is more fluid, it's more open, it's more dynamic, right? I see this project very much sort of sinking into, thinking about how exhibitions can operate within an informational milieu, just as my book was trying to work through and think about how art objects themselves have shifted. So to give you an example of what that actually looks like in practice, I will now talk about one artwork from a group show. So this was a piece by Olivia Mole, who's a Los Angeles artist. It's called Dud Uncaress. And it was from a group exhibition called Liquid Love, which was looking at kind of like how relationships and romance have changed vis-a-vis technology. And Olivia does a work in performance and video and animation. And often Olivia will create like a character, almost a cartoonish character, to carry the narrative of the project. And so the character that Olivia created for this project was Dodonkaras, who this piece was a hybrid performance, sculpture, and installation centered around the figure of the anchoress, which was a medieval female hermit. So Olivia imagined that this hermit was cloistered in the front cabin of the truck, and her character communicates through a dedicated Instagram account. And the piece dramatizes our general seclusion and dependence on the screen to reach out to an outside world. And it's similar to Moll's past projects that pastiche theory, history, and theater to build alternate worlds brimming with absurdity. And absurdity is something that Olivia often plays with. And so the piece did Ankaras transforms the familiar environment of the driver's seat in the front driving cabin into the Ankaras's domain. So this was no longer, the front driving cabin, but the sort of seat of the Ankaras and where where this Ankaras was sort of living. So for the first part of the piece, this is the opening. Olivia dressed as this medieval female hermit, and over a 5-hour period, and there's documentation of this online, Olivia delivered a speech by writing in the front windows and using, those pens that people use to write "just married" on their car, those chalk pens. So that's what Olivia was using. And then Olivia would write out a statement and then clean it, and write out a statement and clean it, and did that sort of almost ritualistically over a 5-hour period while eating gummy worms and drinking beer, which is, again, absurdity. And so during this performance, Olivia also documented the text itself. So these are the last 3 entries where she took a photo of the interior environment. But if you go to this account, you can see kind of her documenting her writing it out on her side onto the screen or the front windows. So, you see there's the performance at the opening, there's the Instagram account. And then after the show opened, when you would go to gas.gallery, this is what you would see. So we worked together to basically have a splash page for so when you would come to the site, this is what you would see. You would see the individual entries from the Instagram being sort of reposted on the front page, and then you would continue to cite it. And I would often do this with artists too, to represent their works on the website. And then the other aspect is that there's the installation, which was the Ankaras's cabin. So you can't really see it in this photo, but Olivia, the essay was just strewn all over the floor along with the pens, and then we let some of the writing also still exist on the windows, not totally the front windows because I had to drive this truck to places, but you got to see sort of the remnants of the performance. And then also Olivia had plants and beer and gummy worms, and she was insistent that the gummy worms remain. And so when we deinstalled, I also had to figure out how to remove those melted gummy worms that had really decayed in the LA sun, which is, also part of my skill set as a curator at this point. So you're put in lots of fun situations, but it was, yeah. So people during open hours when I'm parked at artist run spaces around LA, they would get to, our visitors would get to kind of look through sort of the scene of the performance. And then, as I mentioned, I always did a publication for each exhibition. So we would do a zine for each exhibition. And so the full text from the performance, that full essay, appeared in the zine. So so that's why I wanted to talk about this work, because you see an artist really taking every sort of wing of that platform and using it as a means to present work. So this exhibition or this artwork exists. Perhaps someone will read the essay in the zine and pull it off their shelf 6 months from now. Perhaps someone saw the installation in person. Perhaps someone saw the performance. Perhaps someone stumbled upon the Instagram, right? And all of those are equally important facets of the artwork. So you can see this. Yeah, I love this example because I think it really shows what kind of exhibition model I was moving towards and how I was thinking about that. Okay, so I'm doing gas, I'm doing all these shows, and then 2020 happens. Oh, I should actually, before I talk about that. So I closed the gallery in 2020. And I worked with Lee Tuzman and Caleb Stone to create an archive. And Lee has a whole project where he's thinking about how best practices for archiving artist run spaces, where often you're relying on, in the olden days, like Flickr to document your shows, or Instagram, or these other kinds of platforms that are really unreliable. So I had the honor to work with Lee Tuzman and Caleb Stone to actually use their kind of best practices to create a online archive. And so I think I have examples of, if you just to show. So yeah, so I have this like essay, and then I thought I'd show this one with one of our favorite artists right here. But yeah, so we worked together to create this archive, and the reason why it's designed the way it is, it's supposed to look like the windows of the truck, right? And so that's sort of how you insert into each one. And then we have like, oops, oh yeah, I'm not on the internet. They're also PDFs of the zines are available, documentation of the editions, et cetera, et cetera. And so we were able to do that for all of the shows. And we developed that over a year and then launched it in spring 2023. So I'm very proud of this, and I'm thankful to Lee and Caleb for working with me on this. And then I should mention that they also archive Space 1026, which was an artist-run space in Philadelphia. Their their archive. So they're doing this for other artist-run spaces and smaller spaces around the United States. Okay, so I'm doing gas, blah, 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 doing shows, and then the pandemic happens. And so this photo actually is a well, I guess I should say what happened. I left LA, I put all my stuff in storage and moved to like a 400 square foot cabin in the woods, and did that with my dog by myself for like a year and a half, or whenever we got vaccinated. And so everything was on hold. The whole world seemed like it was turned upside down. And one thing I did a lot of volunteering at that time, just because I felt so like helpless with like what was going on around me. And one of the things I would do on Wednesday mornings is I would deliver meals to low-income homebound seniors who, weren't, like, I would put food on their doorstep, basically, driving around this super rural area of California. So these are seniors who are, already kind of isolated, who are very isolated during this period. And one of those seniors gave me the silver heart. And apparently she just gives them to everyone. Because told the story to people in the community, and they're like, "Oh yeah, she does that. She's been doing that for a long time." But I just thought, it's like an art project, or maybe it's not an art project. Maybe it's just like a moment of everyday poetry, you know. That it really moved me. Like she gave this to me, and I like burst into tears. Like it was just like this moment of just human connection. So that's why this is sort of my representation of that time during the pandemic. And I was sort of going through my materials and preparing for this talk, and I found some writing reflections like from lockdown, where I talk about closing gas, basically. So, I said, I've been thinking a lot about the future of gas, as my pre-COVID programs are currently either in transition, hold, or postponed. In this period, I'm not only thinking through the micro concerns, i.e., how do you curate now? What should art shows look like? But I've also been attentive to the much bigger picture, meaning what is broken or lacking within the current systems of art production and exhibition in terms of equity, support structures, et cetera. How can I use this time and unique set of circumstances, living with my dog in the woods, to build an alternative? Given the crisis of climate change, the urgency of Black Lives Matter, the need for adequate and accessible healthcare during a pandemic, et cetera, what space should art occupy? And I think a lot of artists, and I think a lot of curators, and a lot of people within our sort of field were having those same reflections. And part of me was like, maybe I just stay out here and I like run this nutrition program. Like maybe I'm just moving into a different moment in my life. So yeah, so I took these questions and reflection into a job search, basically, like beginning pretty much in 2021. And I interviewed for a bunch of positions, and I literally, at that point, I was like, I'll move anywhere in the world. I will go anywhere. I'm ready I'm ready for change. And I also wanted all of the things that I just discussed to kind of be the sort of deciding factor in whatever change I made or whatever job I took. And after many conversations and many interviews and I felt the best fit for me was at UC San Diego. So for this last section, this last chapter of the talk, I'll discuss my vision for the organization and then go into the specifics of the institution, focus areas, and select exhibitions. So the Mandeville Art Gallery, which is at UC San Diego, is a newly renovated institute for transformative contemporary art. And transformative contemporary art is key in the gallery's mission statement. So this is the mission statement, as it situates the act of artistic production as a means of actualizing a more just and equitable world. So that really feeds into everything that we're doing at the gallery. Um, the next slide is my vision for the gallery. So the Mandeville Art Gallery is a teaching gallery, and I'll talk about what that means. For the 21st century, promoting technologically innovative, democratic, accessible, equitable, and socially engaged means of artistic production and presentation. And yeah, my curatorial approach draws inspiration for grassroots arts organizations, again, taking the lessons I learned from running GAS. But I also look to artist-centered institutions like Recess in New York and the Luminary in St. Louis, and I apply a similar framework to a pedagogically oriented university art gallery. So I curate 3 to 4 original thematic group exhibitions and solo exhibitions annually, featuring new commissions by prominent local, national, and international artists. And I'm also very attentive to working with artists who are working in mediums that are challenging to support through the mainstream commercial art sector. So obviously someone who's coming out of internet art and these other kinds of practices, I know that artists have a really hard time working in those mediums to translate that into kind of that into more of a commercial space. So I'm supporting a lot of artists through the program who are working in, emerging technologies or other forms of media art, but also social practice, performance, moving image. And I'm also inviting artists who will leverage UC San Diego's research strengths and foster partnerships and connections across campus. And the exhibitions are designed to serve as a site for interdisciplinary research and educational and structured, powered by the work of these incredibly important artists. So that's the, so who have the opportunity to develop their practice within a incredible institution like UC San Diego. And the teaching gallery is part of this. I mean, I came into this job really wanting to plant seeds for the students who work with the gallery and have an experience in the gallery to go on and hopefully start their own arts organization. So I've sort of entered into this position thinking about what the next 20 or 30 years will be for the people who are working with me or the people who are taking my classes. So I teach a class connected to the exhibition program every quarter. And in those classes, we're having these conversations like, what world are we building? What world do you want to see? What do you find inspiring? How do you work? How does one work with artists? What does it mean to be artist centered, right? And so it's that kind of sort of ethical, moral fabric that has already always been so present in my practice as a curator. I'm trying to kind of sort of work towards that being how all curators operate and how the whole art world can sort of shift and change. So I'm hoping to plant those seeds on every single front of the things that we do at the gallery. So I should mention a little bit about the history of the gallery. It was founded in 1966. It's always been highly experimental, and it's always been a non-collecting contemporary art institution. It was established alongside the establishment of the Department of Visual Arts at UC San Diego, which is a very special, very unique visual arts program. Just incredible, like super important artists have worked there over the years. And a lot of really interesting artists have come out of the MFA program too. But this gallery in particular hosted some of the earliest exhibitions of performance and installation art on the West Coast. So Barbara T. Smith had her first retrospective here in 1974. Mike Kelly did a lot of early projects here. Richard Serra did a project at the gallery. I mean, when I first started this position, I got to work in the archives. So the special collections at UC San Diego has everything from 1966 on. We're talking like faxes from the 80s, like catalogs, photographs from, I mean, everything. And so I have never started a job where I've had access to that kind of information, like board notes and all sorts of things. And so when I started this job, I spent like a month or two literally going through every single file to learn the history of this important institution. I should also mention it's deeply tied to the history of artistic innovation in Southern California and the border culture of the U.S. and Mexico. One of the sort of legacies that that I'm very attentive to and trying to bring into the program is that this gallery would give major exhibitions to emerging Southern California artists that then really launched their careers or really like put them in a new direction. And so when I've been doing studio visits and thinking about the shows, I am both, working with artists locally, nationally, and internationally, but also really thinking about how I can support, Southern California artists in the vein that this gallery has done for a long time. I should also mention that over the years, the gallery was called both the University Art Gallery and the Mandeville Art Gallery. It's just so these are flyers from shows in the 70s when it was and some of the 80s when it was the Mandeville Art Gallery, but then at a certain point it was the University Art Gallery, and now it's the Mandeville Art Gallery again. So just mentioning that. And there was a publication by one of my colleagues, so Jordan Crandall, who's a professor in the visual arts program in 2015, published a book called Artistic Research, where it's basically a chronology of every single show that happened in the gallery from 1966 to 2015. And if it's out of print, but there's a high res OCR, all the things, PDF scan of that publication on the Mandeville Art Gallery website. So the gallery almost closed in 2015. There was, protests on campus and a big pushback because this was it's such an important part of the arts ecosystem within San Diego. And then the chancellor was like, you know what, this is a really, let's save this gallery. Let's invest in this gallery. Let's make sure this gallery sticks around for the next 50 years, the next 60 years, the next 70 years. And so amazing, the whole institution, the whole university decided to get behind the Mandeville Art Gallery and invest in the gallery. So they brought in the San Diego-based firm Studio E Architects to design a new building. So the building is part of this larger structure called the Mandeville Center, which was built in 1975. So I mentioned this gallery was started in 1966. It had a couple different locations on campus, including a former bowling alley. That's another story. And then until it was moved to the Mandeville Center in 1975, which is this large kind of 70s brutalist building designed by Quincy Jones, who's a well-known Southern California architect and not the musician. Some people get confused. And so the gallery is still there, but then they invested in sort of these renovations. So this means we have a new floor, a new HVAC system, a dedicated black box video room in the back that has surround sound. And then one of the big additions is this wraparound exterior LED media mesh facade, which was optimized and built by Studio E Architects to display digital artwork. And it's been just so fun to play with that space. And then also because of the HVAC updates, I know that sounds sort of boring, but when you work in the arts, this is actually a big deal because it means that I can accept higher value loans now too. So we have a big Harrison show that's coming up in the fall, and we can host that show because we have the conditions to show their work, which is great. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the focus areas. So you have a little bit of the history. I should mention, so the gallery was under renovation for a long time. They didn't have a director. They weren't doing any programs. It was just a construction site for many years. And then they created my position to run the gallery. And then I started in this position in January 2023. And then I opened my first show in March 2023. And yeah, so it's a new building, new institute, like new everything, but with this like legacy and importance within the larger ecosystem down there. So the focus areas, as I mentioned, sort of in this like first year, I guess a year and a half year. I guess it's been a year. Okay. Year. I'm like, what time? Okay, so it's been a year. I really see, as I mentioned, the gallery operating as a laboratory for art and experimentation. So we're leading artists are invited to develop new projects and showcase their research in collaboration with students, faculty, and staff. This is documentation of an exhibition I'm going to talk about in a moment, called How We Gather. And so for that exhibition, we had artist-led workshops every single week of the show. And so artists were able to come in, develop new projects, work directly with our community to showcase their research. And I'm hoping to do more of that kind of work with the program. As I mentioned, student leadership is huge. I really want the students who work at the gallery, who are taking classes with me, who are going to the shows to go on and be inspired to maybe start their own gallery or, take up leadership positions. Professional development and enrichment opportunities are a huge part of what I do. One of the big things that we have is the undergraduate professional development program. And so this is like a work study jobs at the gallery, both as gallery guides, art preparators, and then communications. There's the communications and marketing position. It's been really exciting because we have this new building, it's a new program, and the students have been really have had a super essential role in sort of thinking about things like working with me on installing these shows and designing the making sure that the wall labels look good and all of these things. And so we have like a really great team who are involved in the program, and people are graduating out of the program now and getting amazing jobs and getting in their top favorite PhD program that they were thinking about doing, or working for incredible institutions. And so I hope that this program continues, that I just see that happening over and over and over again. We also, as I mentioned, I teach museum and curatorial studies courses that are directly tied to each exhibition. That has been really great. And so I'm creating new classes basically 3 times a year to connect to the shows. And then the students themselves started their own organization called the Mandeville Art Collective. So at UC San Diego, I'm sure it might be similar here. You can start a student organization, and then the university gives you funding to like do public programs and that sort of thing. And so they're organizing an exhibition. They've had like art supply exchanges. They've also, a big part of what they do is actually connect to the local art scene, to do walkthroughs, to meet with curators. And it's totally student. I just am like a name on the paperwork. Like they've really taken it and run with it. And it's been super cool to see all of the projects that they've worked on through that. So it's basically, I think in other universities, sometimes they'll have a student advisory board. It's like a more active version of a student advisory board. And then, as I mentioned, like partnerships, like strengthening and building connections to other departments at UC San Diego, and the local arts ecology within San Diego and beyond. So for each show, and I'll talk about some of the shows that I've organized recently, I am working with other departments, and thinking about, and then also bringing in artists who, again, will like really lean into all the resources that we have on campus. I'm also having a lot of conversations and thinking about equity and access. So everything in the gallery is bilingual, Spanish and English, materials across the board. And then using the latest tools and technology to make exhibitions and events accessible to all. At UC San Diego, our campus has free access to ARIA Access, which is an app that is for folks who are low vision. So you can sign on to the app, and then someone on the other side of the app can like lead you through the show and this is also something we've talked a lot about, even in like how we install shows, so that like we had an installation that involved reading, and we had one of the texts at wheelchair height. So this is something, as we're installing shows and thinking about it, and then in my classes we've read Carolyn Lazard's text on art and accessibility. So this is something that's like very much integrated into how the shows are installed and conceived. So I just thought I'd talk about my two big shows that I worked on in the last year, so you have a sense of the kind of programs and I sort of talked about what I'm trying to do, and then now you'll get to see what I'm actually doing. So one of the big shows that I developed was in fall of 2023. It was a group show called How We Gather, and it investigates the notion and enactment of solidarity across various contemporary arts practices through the lens of the pandemic, wherein collaboration and mutuality are key to the ideation and production of the artwork. And the work in the exhibition was organized in two main pathways, like objects in the gallery that invite reflection on mutuality and collaboration, and a robust series of public programs encompassing artist-led workshops, lectures, and performances. So you saw some images in the previous slide of all of the events that we had every week. If you weren't going to those events, you could also just walk into the gallery and engage with several works that invite mutuality and collaboration. There is a lot I can say about this show. One of yeah, I'm like trying to think of, there's so much incredible work in the show. I can maybe talk about one of this work right here with the text. That's a piece by Kimi Hanur, who's an artist who's interested in print-based practices and how they can build community within sort of like present space. And often Kimi will have like conversations with a group and produce a publication, and then a publication also becomes like an event in and of itself to create more dialogue. In this instance, Kimi's piece was actually their will. And instead of the will being something to kind of leave your property to people, and it being something that's centered on property, Kimi was interested in thinking about community and kinship, and having that kinship be the thing that they leave after they leave to the world after them. The public was invited to read their will aloud, and as a group or individually, throughout the run of the exhibition. So obviously, this is a show that's about solidarity and the pandemic, but also about grief. And I think that this piece, I think it was a really deeply moving piece. And then Kimi also created a site-specific poem, which I don't have slides here, where it was when you would walk into the gallery, it was on the beam, and when you would leave the gallery, it was on the beam, so you can kind of see it there. But it was, you were sort of welcomed into the space to reflect on what kinship means to you, essentially. And then when you left the space, you were sort of thinking about what that means in your sort of present life. So I think it was sort of like a welcoming and an exit, and it really was a really beautiful presentation, much like a lot of Kimi's work. But many of the pieces, the objects in the show, kind of had that invitation to participate, to engage, to read with others, to kind of be and like fully present with other people in the space. Alongside several workshops and events. This just opened right before this trip, so I'm still kind of like, this was an amazing exhibition to work on, and one of the best exhibitions, honestly, I've ever developed in my career. So I'm like very, very proud of it. It's a solo show by Lauren Lee McCarthy, who's a professor at UCLA in the Design Media Arts program. And the show, and Lauren has been working for the past 15 years in performance, video installation, software, artificial intelligence, and other media to address how an algorithmically determined world impacts human relationships and social life. And this is Lauren's largest solo exhibition to take place in the United States to date. So again, Southern California artist, this is a big moment, all new work, we fabricated a lot of the structures in the exhibition. But the whole exhibition it includes two bodies of work, Surrogate and Saliva, and both of them are thinking about biosurveillance. So UC San Diego is a big STEM school. It's one of the top sort of schools in the United States, if not the world. And one of the sort of major research areas on campus is genetics and biotech, basically. And so to have a conversation about biosurveillance right in the seat of where a lot of these innovations are actually created, and then also inviting folks across campus to kind of take part in his exhibition, and I'll talk about how that there is a real participatory aspect of that as well, is huge, and exactly what the kind of shows that I want to do. So I feel like not only was this an ambitious, amazing, and Lauren is just a great artist to work with, and great collaborate, just like great mind. So it was, yeah, so it was, I'm very happy with the show across every front. I will mention so a little bit more about the work. So I mentioned there's surrogate and saliva. Surrogate is a performance and video piece and software where Lauren basically offers herself up as a remote controlled surrogate to couples who are interested in having children. And then she also created software. So often software sort of is part of the performance, or sort of fuels the social exchanges in her practice. And so what you see on the wall is the kind of software running. And then there's several videos in the show of basically Lauren, this was like a thought experiment that ultimately fails. And you kind of see how it falls apart, either through kind of the sort of legal structures that are in place that would prevent someone from doing becoming a remote controlled surrogate, to also people's sort of shock or discomfort at that prospect too. So there's a great video in the show called Intended Parents, where Lauren just videotapes herself talking to potential couples. And they're really rich and really interesting conversations where people are talking about kind of like the future of family structures. And the show's really like, I see this exhibition as sort of envisioning the future of genetic engineering, and our subjectivity vis-a-vis that, right? So thinking about, what does it mean with what kind of families can people have in the next like 10 or 20 years, or next 5 years, and how can we rethink these things? And then also, obviously, a big part of the show is reproductive technologies and the reversal of Roe v. Wade and those conversations as well. The other body of work is saliva. So that bar is part of that piece. And this is newer pieces. This is our newer body of work. And for saliva, Lauren is thinking about biosurveillance vis-a-vis saliva. What we built is the saliva bar. So the public is invited to come in once a week. We have like an activation of the installation, so you can see that there, where people are invited to come in and donate their DNA to the installation in the form of saliva, and then take someone else's saliva. And that whole exchange is generated by software that Lauren creates, that Lauren has created. And so Lauren actually ran a half-day training and workshop with UC San Diego students. And then those UC San Diego students are the ones who are activating the sculpture every week. The scripts that they use, like for these sort of micro performances, are within the software. The software, a lot of the project is also thinking about consent and sort of terms of service. So when we, give up if you give up your sort of DNA information through 23andMe, or form COVID testing to like a corporate, we just don't know where this information will go. She's trying to have the public have a conversation, be conscious of that, and think about how that might affect how our sort of larger data profile in the future. So a lot of that project is about data privacy, right? And we think about how the lack of that we have in our current reality. What does it mean, if our DNA information becomes part of our larger data profile, right? So it's a kind of a scary prospect. But I should mention, so in these exchanges, you dictate your terms of service, or the conditions of the exchange, and what people can do with your DNA when they take your sample from the installation. And there's an open field where people can create their own terms. And one thing that's been really lovely to see is that the general public has really leaned into that, or like the public, like people have been coming through, have been playing with that. So sometimes as a curator, you put all these things together, and then the public kind of comes in and they just run with it. Some of the terms that people have added are you need to make my saliva into jewelry. You need to take my saliva and dump it in the ocean and record a video and email it to me. Here's my email address. You need to take my saliva on a hike. So people are just like really poetic in how they're taking other people's DNA information, right? And integrating it into their lives. There's also part of the software allows you to relay secret messages. So if you take someone's saliva, you can also receive a secret message. And then a big part of the part of the software too, is that when you donate your saliva to the installation, you're also including several descriptive factors around yourself. And so you can say you're a Sagittarius who is a runner, so you start at one of the things that happens in the exchanges is that you're seeing other people through their kind of self-defined identifiers, and it's something that we're really attuned to and something we do already whenever we like sign up for anything. And so people have been also playing with that and mocking that kind of ask and request that we often have. It's been actually really funny to see kind of the entries and how people define themselves. And then you select someone else's DNA from the database according to how they describe themselves. So there's a lot of like poetry and play. Yeah, it's been a really interesting way. It's like social experiment again. But I also think it's like, yeah, it's been interesting to see how it all came together. And I should also mention, I worked closely with the environmental health and safety folks at UC San Diego too, to make sure that like everything, we use like medical grade vials and all of that stuff to make sure that everything was very safe. Yeah, so that was this just opened, so I'm still like in it. I'm like in this green space like every day, I feel like, so it's like in my but yeah, that's basically what I prepared. So I showed you my sort of 3 chapters. Here's all of my identifying information, if you want to find me. And I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. And thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here and to connect with you all today. So thank you.
Thanks, Ceci. And I hope that all of you found that a window into the world of what a curator does with their time. It might be of interest to you. Questions? Who's got them? I don't think you all have made me start with questions yet, but I'm happy to, and they're gonna be questions that prompt you all to think more also. So, Cece, thank you. Thank you so much for that.
Should I go back to my first screen? The hello one.
You're just reminding me how much there is there. So I was thinking about working with students at the Mandeville, and this, you didn't talk about this now, but you've told me this at other times, that there are student shows there as well. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about doing those student shows for the students here, and kind of like, not just like what it means for students to show their work in a context like that, but this mixture of it being the space with the history that it is, that's also open to showing student work, and your own curatorial openness to showing student work, which is quite unique within, I think, an institution of this sort to offer its space to students.
Yeah, so we do one MFA show a year. So there at UC San Diego, we have a dedicated undergraduate gallery that's like amazing, and they are turnaround shows like every 2 weeks. Sometimes it's like really active space. And then we also have like 3 other galleries on campus that are for graduate and undergraduate shows. So we have like a tremendous amount of square footage that's dedicated for student work all over campus. But the gallery historically has always had these like group MFA shows that were for graduating, for the graduating cohort. And I teach a class in spring quarter. So when I go back to San Diego, I'm going to start teaching this in 2 weeks, where we work together towards that MFA show. And I did it for the first time last spring, and then we opened our first group MFA show this January for a month. Yeah, it was a great experience. I also, as you can tell, I've spent a lot of time like going through the archives and seeing what was done and like what people's expectations were and what worked and what didn't work. And so for that MFA show, I sort of I talked to past students, I talked to alums, and just got a sense of like what has worked and didn't work. And one thing that we did this for the first time this year is we made it a preview exhibition. So historically, the group show would come at the end after everyone's graduated, and then people are graduated and they're moving out of their studios, and they're suddenly like forced to do this like, or not forced, but they're doing this like group show, and it's very stressful. And then the MFAs do solo thesis shows too in the spring, so it's like back-to-back solo thesis shows and then a group show. So I thought, it'd be better is if we do preview shows so people can preview what you're going to show is part of your thesis show. And so people can kind of test that out. Yeah. And then in that class too, we're putting together kind of the vision for their solo thesis shows too. But it was great. We have the MFA program if for undergrads who are interested in pursuing an MFA at UC San Diego. It's fully funded, and it's a small program. So it's usually like 8 folks per year. It's pretty small MFA program. Sometimes it can be, maybe like 15 students in an MFA class. They get studios and then you're in a research institute. So a lot of the MFAs are, taking, I don't know, like neuroscience classes, or they're able to kind of tap into all of the other offerings at the university. So it's great if you're a research-based or research-focused artist.
What do you all have to say? Questions? I know that they're out there.
I can also turn. Should I take the slide off? I didn't have a black or like a plain blank slide. Is this a lot? I don't know for the stream.
Oh, I think it's fine.
Okay. Sorry. Oh, there's a question.
Okay, hi.
Hi.
Are there any like really specific skills that being a curator on a college campus has basically like forced you to develop? Because I'm sitting here and I'm realizing how like constantly open or like aware of everything, like not only on campus, but like in the US, you have to be constantly aware of in order to like have like continuous like art like experiences that are, like being shown.
Yeah. So the question is sort of like, what have I learned by curating a college campus? Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. I didn't mention this, but I've been teaching and as a professor for like 10 years too. So I think I have colleagues who are curators who maybe worked only in like more formal institutions. And I think it would be more jarring to like jump into a university space. But since I was teaching in like curatorial practice programs at like CCA and SFAI. So I think because I have that background, it doesn't feel it's actually really exciting for me. And one of the most amazing things about university art galleries is you do have quite a there's more freedom there in some cases because you're not within the sort of nonprofit art sector. Often they're like fundraising, and you have a board, and on some university art galleries do have boards and that sort of thing too. And there are these other pressures, but often I actually taught an entire seminar on university art galleries in the United States. So this is like close. And it was the first class I taught at UC San Diego, and it was so fun. And the students had to work in that archive I was talking about, which was super cool. And then they had to focus on university art galleries and the history of university art galleries all over the United States, and did like case studies and stuff. But you in some ways, the market is there, but always in the art sector. But when you're working in an academic environment, you're there to produce knowledge, right? And that is always at the end of the day, what we're here to do. And so I think it just allows you a lot of risk taking and allows a lot of innovation. I think for artists, it's a really exciting prospect too. And so, yeah, I think university art galleries are a super, super important part of the sort of larger larger sort of art field in particularly in the United States where it's not like Europe where they have Kunsthalles and every little town has like some really amazing government funded art space. And so in many ways the university art galleries like play that role. And so yeah, I feel again like so honored to take on this position and then be working. I mean, UC San Diego students are just brilliant and like really brilliant. So I'm happy to kind of work with them and think alongside them and the faculty and my colleagues. It's a really special place. Thanks for that question. Oh, there's a hand.
I want to ask a question about regarding on the relationship between artist and curator. Like as a creator, like how does artists or like this vice versa discover or like reach out or build this community like as a creator? Like because one of the slides I saw one of the artists named Memo Aktan. I know he's a Turkish guy and he, if I remember, he lives in London. So there's like a kilometers distance between there and here. So how this community builds up? How this I don't know, do you discover them or like in this like as destiny you reach out together as like you just intersect with the goal is the same and you intersect each other or something like that. My question is like how this community was up.
Yeah, well, Memo is actually a colleague of mine at UC San Diego. So he's a full faculty member. So he lives in Southern California now, but he did live in London. But now he's spending more time in the ocean, which is a good thing. It's a little colder in London. So he's pretty happy. But yeah, I mean, I've been working and sort of living in the arts for 20 years. So I feel like a lot of it is just I'm meeting people constantly. I'm constantly doing studio visits. I'm like reading. I'm going to shows. I did think showing up actually is the most important part of creating community and just showing up and showing up and showing up and showing up. So I've been doing that for 2 decades. And so I know a lot of people now. That's basically, and with the students I work with, I'm like, go to things, find all the things and just go to them. And it means so much too for artists too, especially if I mean, the coolest thing I mean, many great things is that you get to see an artist career just, you just get to see the development of an artist's career. Like I was just in New York and I saw Shauna Moulton's solo show at MoMA. And I remember seeing Shauna's work in 2005. And seeing her show her work in like, small spaces in Brooklyn. And then I did a big exhibition with Shauna at YBCA. That was one of her first large projects in the United States. And then I saw this like, gorgeous show at MoMA and people were sitting there and watching the video over and over again. And it was just like, I actually got like, I cried because I was just, it's like you get to see an artist kind of start just like, okay, I'm getting some projectors from a friend, I'm throwing it in a room, and blah, blah, blah. And then 20 years later, it's like this gorgeous, just you see the full vision and all the support. So that's, it gives me goosebumps actually to talk about it. Like it is exciting to see artists, like take those leaps and grow and change and do bigger and bigger things. So yeah, but I guess that was a little bit of a right turn from your question, but yeah, just go to things and talk to people and show up.
So until more questions come around, do you have a question? I like these questions so far are raising a point that I was going to also ask you about, which is, I imagine for a fair amount of you here, and we're in the Department of Media Study, this plasma is about media arts, but I suspect still that a lot of people's orienting point is film, video in some capacity, which to be long-winded about it, you could all look at Ceci's book and understand that term expanded internet art takes directly from a history of something called expanded cinema, which is an introduction of film, video art into an artistic practice. And like I say, this is to be long-winded about it, but really what I want to bring all your attentions to is part of what we're getting to experience right now is an understanding of what the practice of being a curator is. And I imagine for a lot of you, particularly because you're coming from that orientation, maybe more from the media side of thing, you aren't entirely clear in your mind, what does a curator do? And I feel like that's kind of what these questions have been about so far. So I sort of wonder if you could share in like a really, really basic way for everyone, like, what does a curator do? And how would a student who's maybe making work like approach talking to a curator when they don't really know what a curator does?
Okay, I think that's a great question. And I love sort of making things, because I think a lot of things in the art world are like, how does this work? And I love to demystify. So it's a great question. So what I do is I work with artists to present their work. Quite simply. But what I'm thinking about is like the public sort of space around the work. I'm thinking about getting resources for the work. I'm thinking often I'm like sort of getting inside the head of the artist to think like they might be trying to tell me the thing that they want, and it's kind of mind melding sometimes with an artist, so that you can be like, oh, you're right, we do need those gels. Yep, no, yep. So it's like production. I guess, in some ways, yeah, it's like you're sort of helping them produce the work, vision the work, but then you're also in many cases working with an institution or your own institution. So with GAS, I was kind of my own institution, which is why we got to have so much fun with artists, because there's no one to say no. And sometimes the only no is like that we actually can't have a flat screen underneath the truck while we drive around Los Angeles for a lot of reasons. And if we do, I mean, one thing I didn't talk about is I actually had to partially deinstall and install those shows for each pop-up because I was driving a truck around Los Angeles. So anyway, but yeah, I just work closely with artists. I pay attention to artists. I write about their work, and I kind of like cheerlead for them in various ways. And I think as an artist, you just, yeah, I'm always sort of meeting with artists and looking at art. It's just like what I do. But I think you should always feel free to like email someone who you think is interesting, who might be interested in your work. Like I'm very open and responsive to that. Doing studio visits. I don't know if you talked about like the sort of process or the like studio, like organizing studio visits with people. And then, yeah, just advocating for yourself as an artist, I think is so crucial. So showing your work as much as possible. I talked about this actually a little earlier. I think residencies as a curator, I've gotten a lot out of residencies. Not a lot of curators do residencies. It's not, but for me, it's been really informative. Yeah, I just take every opportunity that is there, and reach out to people who you think have interesting ideas and show up to people's things, and then what, they start showing up to your things. That's the other cool part about that. So creates a nice nice kind of back and forth in that way.
Hi. So for these galleries and viewings, so you said that your students will start like showing their art installations at like at where at UC. Like, do they is it like a way for new artists to like get themselves out there to do other like art installations and stuff, and like vice versa with like more like advanced artists to like come over to these like for beginner students? And is there like a way for like networking or a way to like mm, have like give confidence to the new artists to continue with that, if that makes sense? Sorry if that.
Yeah, it does make sense. Yeah. I mean, as I mentioned, I like the gallery that I run is part of a larger community in the visual arts department. And so I also want to kind of acknowledge and credit my colleagues too, who are doing really cool things like bringing interesting critics to their classes and artists to speak. I'm on the committee we have like a visiting lecture series. So we bring in artists all the time, and those artists do studio visits with the MFAs, and that's part of the deal. And then, as I mentioned, we have several galleries that are we have a gallery that's specifically for undergraduate work. So those artists are like pitching shows or organizing group shows. And then we have that student organization, the Mandeville Art Collective. Their mission is to advocate for the arts at UC San Diego. So yeah, they do that's what they do. So they're also inviting a lot of the students to come off campus and like do a walkthrough at the MCASD with the curator, like really cool, like firsthand experiences. And then one thing that they're also on their Instagram, they'll post open calls for emerging artists all over San Diego. So that's part of what they do. And then have events. So they've also seen themselves as like a platform for other artists within our community to, show their work off campus as well. And I think the students who run that collective, like it's the same thing. They show up and they're creating avenues for people to show up and really see themselves as a resource. So yeah, I think we're just like a little hive of activity over in visual arts. And it's something that all of my colleagues and I contribute to in various ways. And I think it creates a really special experience for the students and both undergraduate and graduate. And there's also one thing that's been with the MFA show, for example. One of my coworkers is a like professional preparator. But then we also have student art preparators who are part of that professional development program. And we got to install the MFA show, and these are their TAs, that they've had classes with. And then we got to work together on like actually installing the show. And it was really cool to see that kind of conversation because in many cases, the undergrads maybe hadn't seen their work before. I also organized a faculty show when I first started of new faculty, and that was wonderful because for instance, like a lot of these students maybe hadn't seen their professor's work in real life. They've just seen like, JPEGs online, like Memo, who was in that show. So it was really neat too for the community to see what people are making within our community.
Hi. So as a curator, I was kind of wondering, do you have any kind of creative liberties when working with artists on, putting their work in these exhibitions? Do you ever add your own kind of flair to that? Or are you kind of just all for them?
I'm all for them. Pretty much.
Okay.
Because it's, I mean, I have had colleagues who like, I see, for instance, one thing, like when I've gone to like the Venice Biennial, when you see the curator's name is in larger text than the artist, that kind of thing, that's not cool. So I really see myself as like a behind the scenes person to make sure. And actually, I'm realizing I've said this in the past, like I kind of deal with a lot of the BS installing show, like weird, annoying things that you would never think of, like, so I have so many stories actually of like sourcing weird materials and making sure that someone can get around the thing. And is that going to be too big? Oh, wait, no, it needs to be 2 inches high. Like all of the kind of minutia of exhibition production, I often am like dealing with the artist. Sometimes the artist might have a studio and we're all having those conversations. Sometimes I had like I might have a larger team on the production side and we're all having those conversations. So we're kind of all, it's like a group effort. But I'm not the center. I'm there. The artist is always the center. And my job is to make sure that I realize that artist visions to its ultimate limit, and get the resources and get the you know, the sort of buy-in in some cases from the institutions I work in so that we make a successful show that is like in line with the thing that an artist has in their head. One thing that I do too is I'm writing a lot of the wall text and the writing around the show, and so that I'm always thinking about sort of translating those ideas to be legible to as many different types of audiences as much as possible. And as I mentioned at the Mandeville Art Gallery, all of our wall texts are translated into Spanish. So I'm also thinking about using language that can translate easily, you know, so not kind of like, so the way I write the wall text and the wall labels, it's very simplified so that like we're not losing anything in translation. So it's things like that when you walk into a show, you may not necessarily see, but when you're kind of on the production side, you start seeing. And one thing that's great about the students who are working with me on these shows, they're all visual arts majors, and this is the first time that they've like helped on the production side, and they're like, oh wow, I never realized there was so much work, like condition reports and that sort of thing too. So there's also a registrarial component. But it's and crates and shipping, and so there's a lot of work that goes behind the scenes and into something you see in a gallery. And but for me, it's more making sure that everything's sort of as legible as possible to as many people as possible. And that also led, you know, like think about press releases and all of these other aspects of it. And then I'm doing tours all the time of the shows to different audiences as well. And then the gallery guides who work at the gallery are also giving tours. And so I create a full syllabus for them for every single show. And then we spend half a day. We have like a half-day workshop too, where I'm like, we lead each other, we do tours for each other, so that we can kind of see how different people talk about the work. And it's almost like dress rehearsal basically. And then sometimes we've had like for those sort of dress rehearsal days, we'll bring in friends too to kind of like see what the tours are like. So I work really closely on every single aspect of the production of these exhibitions, but I've always done that in other sort of positions as well.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Pardon my walk.
Hello.
Hi.
Being a curator, you, I'm sure, deal with a lot of artists with strong personalities, strong visions. In the planning and creating of these exhibitions, what are some strategies or like advice you have in compromising that strong vision with like reality in terms of, you know, making it happen, similar to what you were just talking on before?
Yeah, I think I try to show up in all aspects in my life with kindness and empathy. And so you know, and I understand if someone gets fixated on something and you're like, I don't know if that's really important. But you hear them. I don't shut people down. So I'm like, oh, okay, where's that coming from? What's the desire here? You know, and you can't say yes to everything as much as I would like to. But you listen to other people, and you sort of show up with as much compassion and kindness and empathy in that listening, to understand what people need. But I also, especially for like really involved projects, I try to work with people that I know I can work with too. So you know, like if someone has a reputation for being a real jerk, I'm not gonna try to do a show with them because I don't have time for jerks. So, you know what I mean? So it's like there's also a personality part of that too, to make sure that because you're dealing with so many different things. I have one story of an artist I worked with. This is like sort of set the bar for what I want all. So hopefully all the artists in the room, you'll be like, oh, I'll try to be like that. And in a big project, I did a beautiful, incredible exhibition with Samara Golden at YBCA. And Samara is just a light as a person. And that show was so ambitious and so much work. And all of the preparators and the whole production team were 100% on board. And it was like we climbed the mountain together and we got to the top and everyone was high-fiving around the, and it's because of the presence that Samara brought into the team and her respect for the people who are helping her make her vision happen, that really made a huge difference. Even when we were, so the installation was in this gallery that had 20-foot tall ceilings and there were skylights. There were 18 skylights and Samara created little vignette scenes in furniture upside down in those skylights. So the production team had to like be on these lifts working 8 hours a day, like putting furniture, like securing in earthquake proof furniture upside down in 18 different scenes. And then we covered the floor in mirror so it would reflect infinitely. So when people would come into this space, they would look at these scenes down and up and you're in this kind of infinite space. And the crew who worked on that show still keep in touch with me and they're like, that was one of the most rewarding experiences I've ever had with an artist. So it's just, you can do ambitious things, but if you just show up and create a team environment that feels really good, and even if it's a lot of work, we would listen to Prince and dance. It was fun. It was really wild, crazy thing to build, but Samara's just a great human being and brought that presence into the project. And we created this incredible exhibition that was just one of the most, and I'm very proud of that show. And this recent project I did with Lauren feels very much the same way, where we did this wild thing and it's now has its own life. And Lauren throughout the whole project has just been like a dream to work with. So those artists are it's just don't be a jerk, show up to things. I don't know.
I'm pretty sure that's where we need to end.
Okay.
Don't be a jerk and show up to things. I was waiting for that.
Be a good person.
Ceci, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.